Hello and welcome back to another Trebuchet disc golf video. Is that how he does it? I think that's how he does it. Okay, so this is a reaction video to Josh's most recent, I think, video. But let me preface that I really, 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 really honestly appreciate that Josh and Nick can have a conversation and be honest and make jokes about being mean to each other. Like, I love it. That's absolutely beautiful. Thank you, both of you gentlemen, for being awesome and sharing your opinions, even though they might potentially be different. That is very important to me that we are able to do that and remain nice to each other. So I'm going to do my best to do that. That is challenging for me. Like I'm crass, 100%. And none of this is so. Let me first credit where credit is due. John from Ace It Disc Golf, lovely human, very smart human. A lot of his disc golf course review posts are prefaced with, "This is just a discussion of mechanics. Nothing here is personal." And then they are bookended on the back end of, "This is just a discussion of mechanics. Nothing here is personal." And then in the middle, he might agree with you or he might rip your argument completely to shreds, both of which have a lot of value to them. But he makes sure to indicate that there's nothing personal there. We are just discussing mechanics. I want to say that's absolutely 100% true of me. That's maybe a tiny fib. I'm going to take a lesson from John and make sure that I'm not doing that. So thank you, John. That's really cool. That is obviously a very enlightened human who we could all learn from. And I think Josh and Nick are on the same page. Like, they're having civil conversations about things that they potentially disagree on. So love it. Keep it up. I will try to mind my manners. If I don't mean anything by it. Please call me on it and I will fix it. But that said, we won't have a problem. So this is about the video about, are hips a power generator or not? And that is in the section that I'm focusing on. In the beginning, they talk about nose angle. I am absolutely not an expert on nose angle. My nose angle is bad. I came from Ultimate. I tend to throw way the heck nose up. I've recently started messing around with Tech Disc, being able to get to neutral, hoping to get to nose down. I think Disc Golf Neil, now Stepwise Disc Golf, is somewhat of an expert on that. He's spent a lot of time working on nose angle with Tech Disc. So I'm going to tap out of that discussion, leave that to people that are more qualified than me. I've basically never tried to throw a distance line in my life. It's not what's interesting to me. Golfing well is what's interesting to me, and mechanics. So, anyways, so Josh poses a question: are the hips a power generator or not? So I think the thing that I can add to this conversation is, I'm someone that is firmly on the other team of, and I can't even say what team I'm on before I get into the nuance of what we're doing here. But I feel like the the overarching thing of this conversation, are the hips a power generator or not? I feel like it's a semantic argument. And most humans are not technically minded enough and technically languaged enough, and language is too broad of a shotgun tool that's not precise for us to even have this conversation in a way that's productive without misunderstanding each other and making assumptions that are incorrect. And just, it's very tricky. Like I say to a lot of my clients, like, language is such an imprecise tool for describing what we're doing here that it's like people say, okay, can you describe the feeling of a good hit? Like, yeah, I can, but it's going to be me trying to describe to you the color green if you've never seen it. It's not really useful. It can be, like, if I'm really good at it, which I'm okay. It can be useful, but it's like you're trying to fix a computer with a hammer. It's not advisable. So okay, back to the content. Josh says, are the hips a power generator or not? Even that question is loaded semantically. Are the hips generating power? No, they are not. This is very clearly demonstrated by the last review that I did for Kalen, where I'm trying to mimic his motion of, he's upright on top of his front leg, and he figured, I don't even want to do it because, like, I'm scared. But he was collapsing forward and using the forward collapse to project the hip backward. So the hip is moving without ground force. That is absolutely not what we want. And my, not proof, but supporting evidence of that is making that demo for him. I tweaked the heck out of my front hip. I was walking around all yesterday, like with a decent, it wasn't pain, but it was a decent amount of soreness around like the inside deep muscles in my hip. Just from, I'll do it once, just from doing that. Like I did that 20 or 30 times and that screwed up my hip. So that is not the motion we want. We want all of the motions that our hip makes to be supported by ground force and the hip to be in a strong and supported position. Same thing is true of the knee. We want the knee to be in a strong and supported position at all times, especially if we're doing an athletic maneuver like bracing well. Most amateur players do not brace well. They float over the brace, and it's good because it keeps their knee safe. It's bad because it keeps them from getting to their personal max in any kind of elite level distance. Okay, so Josh's first question, are hips a power generator or not? Nick answers yes and no. It's a yes and no kind of thing. Absolutely 100% agree. I think Nick is saying the same thing as me in a way. Like the answer is yes and no. Full stop. And we have to then Nick says, totally agrees with me as well. And he says that we need to define what is a power source if we want to have that discussion. Is it where power comes from, or is it something that adds power during the pull through? So are the hips somewhere that power comes from? Hard no. Absolutely not. The power comes from the run up. There is energy in my whole body and my hips in the form of momentum. Then the brace happens, and that momentum, half of that momentum, gets redirected, and then this half of that momentum turns into torque. So are the hips a power source? Absolutely not. But then the other half of that is or are the hips something that adds power during the pull through? That's a lot messier. Yes, the hips add power during the pull through, but not because you're activating muscle. Like what we found evidence for in that last video where I hurt myself is that there aren't muscles. Humans do not have good muscles that do this. Humans don't have a primary muscle that moves the hip rotationally sideways. We do have good muscles that move the entire hip up. That's what our legs are supposed to do. They're supposed to piston in a straight line. More on that in every other video I've ever done. But you don't want that assembly to be rotating. You want this assembly to be here. Okay, so moving on, Josh says, are you trying to transfer ground force through your hips to create some kind of lag sequence and accelerate your torso? Again, huge semantic thing. I wouldn't put the word lag sequence in any coaching that I ever do ever. Because lag is something going before something else goes. And I don't want this to go before this goes. If this goes, then T-Rex arm not going to work. So everything needs to start at the same time, but it's not necessarily going to finish at the same time, because I want my hips to go 45 degrees-ish. I want my shoulders to go as far as they can, which hopefully is at least another 45 degrees. So my shoulders are at 90, my hips are at 45. Everything's going to start at the same time. They both start, my shoulders catch up and pass, and then here I'm done. So my hips went 45, from 45 back to 45 forward, total of 90 degrees. My shoulders went from 90 to the other 90, which is 180. There's no lag. Right, and this is like Chris Taylor pretty well proved this, I believe, with motion capture, that like these start at the same time. It's just that this one, the shoulders are going to travel further, so they have to be going faster, and they're going to catch up and pass. So lag sequence is like, I would never do that. So let's just set that aside. But if we try to understand what Josh means, obviously Josh doesn't want people to do this. He knows that. He's put that in videos. But are you trying to transfer ground force through your hips to create some kind of sequence, we'll cut out the lag, and accelerate your torso. Yes, absolutely. It looks like from my notes that I'm looking at here instead of looking at you. I don't think Nick answered that because they were having an organic conversation. It wasn't, a debate. And then Josh goes on to say, do you push the ground to accelerate something or decelerate something? So are you pushing the ground to make something accelerate or to decelerate everything? And I think what he meant was, do you want the hips to just stop, or do you just want the front hip to stop and clear so that the torso is still turning forward, the hips are still turning forward? And then Nick, again, organic conversation, he kind of got cut off and didn't get to finish his thought here, but he said, I used to think of adding rotational power during the entirety of the throw. And then that thought didn't get finished. So we don't know what he thinks now. So maybe we'll follow up with Nick and figure that out. But Josh goes on to say, are we trying to stop the hips 100%? Boom, the hips have stopped. We're good. And now we're going to throw. Or are we trying to clear just the front hip, have the rotation continue so that the torso ends up forward and our hit is here? And then Nick didn't exactly answer, but Josh answered for him and Nick agreed. So they both agreed on this. So Nick agreed that the brace is just there to give you something to throw against. And that's what I wanted to like kind of chime in on the most is like, I think Nick is right. Let's just say that much. But the way that my brain goes to explain that doesn't make sense with physics. So there's an extra step that I think needs to be done so that it does make sense. And this is something that I actually went over with Blitz the one time we actually got to play a course together, which we should do more. I went down to Northfork and played around with him, and he was trying to explain these ideas about bracing, and he had me do this demo where he's like, okay, brace, and then pull against my arm, and you can feel something. And I don't remember exactly what he did, but I was like, okay, sure, but I'm not pulling this way. I'm not throwing that way. I'm throwing this way. So then how does my brace here, how does me running and stopping against that help me pull against you when you're pulling that way? And at that point, he had to stop and do a double take and was like, wait, that doesn't work. And I think that's really common that like we get this idea in our head about how the mental model works, but it has some missing piece in it that we just haven't figured out yet. And I think that's what happened to Blitz. Like he's a very smart coach and he had a really good idea, and what he was saying did work. It does work. The brace does provide an anchor for the throw, but not in the way he was thinking of it. So, super common. Like I've done the same thing a million times, but I think what's missing is, so Josh and Nick both agreed the brace is just there to give you something to throw against. Yes, absolutely. But I'm not throwing against that. I'm throwing against my hips. So it's tricky to think where to start with this. First of all, let me say I really appreciate that Josh has recently said that he does not teach a hip clear. So a hip clear is my 3 rails thing of getting here, clearing your front hip. Josh said he doesn't teach that. Josh also made it very clear in recent videos, I'm not sure if it was this one or the last one, that he has a very difficult job of coaching to 60,000 people at the same time. That's an impossible task. I feel like he does do a really good job of that. But if you're going to coach to the median of that 60,000 people, some nuance is going to be lost. And it should be lost because you're shotgun approaching the whole thing. What I feel like gets missed in that is that hip clearing is super important. And that's probably correct for Josh to gloss over. But people ask questions about this on my Discord, and initially I was like kind of frustrated because I'm a human, and I kind of assumed that I disagreed with both of these gentlemen. That is not the case. I feel like I mostly agree with them now that I've gone back and looked at the video more closely. But point I was trying to make is that Josh doesn't teach a hip clear, but if you look at the one throw that Josh does in the video I'm referencing, which I will link to, Josh does clear his front hip. Absolutely. It is very clear. You're looking at a back view and you see front pockets and then back pockets. He's clearing this hip 100%. If he doesn't teach that because that's what he thinks is best for his clients, that's totally fine. But it's important for me as someone who is coming from a different approach to realize that he's not teaching it, but he does do it. And there's kind of a nuanced thing of Nick does too in his throw, even though he's more forward, as Josh said, which is correct. So back to this idea of the brace is just there to give you something to throw against. Yes. And the thing it's giving you to throw against is the pelvis rotating forward. That mass in motion, starting your kinematic sequence, is the thing you are throwing against. So there's a foundational level of mass rotating, and you're throwing against that. So this is rotating forward, and your throw, however you want to think about it, happens on top of this rotating. So there's this one. Your hips are rotating forward during the whole throw. That is the base of support that you float any torso rotation, meaning lumbar spine rotation. This rotation has to float on top of this rotation. This arm drive has to float on top of this rotation and this rotation. This horizontal upper arm abduction has to float on top of hip rotation and shoulder rotation. And then the elbow opening has to float on top of all of that. So there's at least 4 different layers of where you can get power. Never mind the back leg, front leg option of you can drive off your back leg and you can just brace on your front leg and cause rotation that way. They both work. They're just different. So that's what I feel like is the missing thing that I feel like most people just aren't getting. And that's where we build mental models that aren't accurate according to physics, like bracing here somehow helps me pull that way. It doesn't. Pushing on the ground here cannot make my pull more effective. Being grounded into that and having my hips move can give me this rotation, can give me a force to pull against with my upper body. So you're pulling against the torque in your hips and the momentum in your hips. Josh's analogy that you can't fire a canoe from a cannon. Nailed it. First try. Can't fire a cannon from a canoe. That's a really good analogy. You can. You're just going to send your canoe backwards 20 feet and probably capsize it in the process. So I really like that analogy. I think it's really cool. It's really cute. And it makes sense. Like if you don't have a stable base, you can't have an arm cannon on top of that. It's just not going to work. That's why I think a lot of really solid approaches in disc golf are build the platform you're throwing from, whether it's here in my one leg form or here in a standstill. Build the platform, put your cannon on top of that. So at first, you're not even worried about the platform. You're just going to simplify the platform and you're going to work on the cannon. Just get the cannon to make sense. And then try to add a rocket boosted canoe to it later. You know, don't start with a rocket canoe and put a crappy cannon on the top of it. Just make a cannon that works first. So what else did I want to get here? I think there's a really important thing to understand about the way that Nick throws too. And I want to echo what Josh said. He is very proficient. I also think he's very proficient he actually has, I forget what the context is, but he has some formal education in having a mechanical and math-based mind. That's why he speaks the way he does, which I personally find very refreshing for someone to speak like an engineer. Josh made fun of him for it in jest in video, but I really appreciate that about Nick, that he can speak and use big words and have them be technically correct. I feel like that conveys a lot of meaning, which is missing from a lot of disc golf coaching, in my opinion. So thank you, Nick. Very much appreciate it. But I feel like what's missing from what Nick is doing is the nuance there of, well, hey, Nick, you just blow past your brace. Sure. Like, so do all of the people that compete in distance comps. Like, they're not stopping, getting 100% containment and falling backwards. Their Wiggins is like, bam, and has to spin around 3 times to slow down. So, stopping all of your momentum behind the brace when you're going for a distance line is not optimal. It's better to blow past that a little bit and have your canoe be rocket boosted, not stopping really quick. But anyways, even though Nick is passing his brace is still doing its job. Its job, and Blitz throws exactly the same way. Like, he, especially in his standstills, his X step is a little bit better now. But in his standstills, he's blowing past his brace 100%. Does that mean his brace isn't working? No, his brace is working just fine. His exceptional athleticism, and the same with Nick, allows them to get a lot out of that brace even in passing. I've said that before, that Nick throws with an in passing brace style. It's still a brace, it's still very effective, obviously. Like, his numbers, you can't fake that. So you could, but he's not. So even as he is passing the brace, he still gets a lot of containment in his front hip. So that means his front foot gets on the ground ahead of his center of gravity, and that ground contact, the foot getting pushed into the ground by the quad extending, starts a force wave that goes through his front hip, slows his front hip down, so his hip may not be in Drew Gibson mode. Like Drew Gibson, if you look at some of his old footage, he gets down and you can actually see the hip move backwards. Seabass has this in his butt wipe drill. He says you should, given a good throw, wipe this glute forward on the wall, and then when you clear, this hip wipes, this glute wipes backwards. So this hip is actually going backwards. You can actually see that in Drew Gibson's full power throws. It's insane. Not only is he stopping his front hip and clearing his front hip, he's reversing the direction of his front hip so that this hip can move forward even faster with even more torque, even more supported. So both hips are having force applied to them, momentum and brace, and they cause a switch. That's how you get a buzz to 500 feet. So Nick is doing the same thing. He's just not ending, bam, in a balanced one leg pose like Drew Gibson often does when he's playing golf. Nick flies past the brace, but that doesn't mean he's not starting this force wave with the front leg slamming the front hip. So he's going to cause that same torque, and then he's going to pass the brace because his canoe is going at rocket speed. Like, it's not as simple as, well, he flew past his brace so he didn't brace. That just doesn't work. You have to look at motion capture of how fast his hips turned relative to how fast he moved past his brace, and you'd be able to see that torque of the hips peaking, and then the shoulders peaking later, and then the elbow peaking later, and then the disc peaking after that. It's kinematic sequence stuff. So I just want to add that to the conversation, that it is not as simple as we make it out to be, and especially understanding what the heck people are trying to say is not as simple as what we think it is. Because like Josh's initial question in that section of the video, are the hips a power generator or not? Does that mean that they're creating their own energy during the throw? Or does that mean that energy is expressed through the hips? You know, the hips are not capable of creating power in a meaningful way unless you're driving off your back leg going from flexed to extended. Then your back hip can create power. But that's not what we're trying to do in the way that any of the three of us are trying to coach. It might be more applicable in standstills. It is more applicable in standstills. But are the hips a power generator? Depends on how you look at the semantics of that question. So my official answer is the hips are not a power generator. The hips have power in them, momentum from the walk up. That power is translated into torque around the brace, stopping the front hip. And one more thing, there's a video of, I forget his last name because it's Polish, I believe, but Jan Zelensky or something, that Seabass always posts, and he's a javelin thrower. And you can see absolutely in javelin that, like, it's more like a forehand than a backhand, but he's running full tilt. He stops here, this hip stops, this hip slams forward, and the javelin comes forward with a sequence off of that hip. So it's exactly the same. Brace stops or slows this hip. The momentum from this hip continues forward. That creates hip torque. That creates the foundation of the throw that we throw against with the rest of the body. So that's what I think. Again, this is just a discussion of mechanics and even worse, semantics. Tons of respect for both Nick and Josh, regardless of how many bots are involved. Thank you, gentlemen. I am standing on your shoulders. Absolutely. All right. Peace. See you next time.